The static crackled through mission control at exactly 4:17 a.m. on July 21, 1969. Everyone knows Neil Armstrong's famous words as he stepped onto the lunar surface. But what most people don't know is what happened during the 2 minutes and 17 seconds of radio silence that NASA claims was due to technical difficulties. Flight Director Gene Kranz was standing at his console when Armstrong's voice suddenly cut through on a medical channel that wasn't being broadcast to the public. His heart rate had spiked to 160 beats per minute, far above the expected range for the controlled descent. What Armstrong said next would fundamentally change the course of America's space program forever, though it would take 50 years for the truth to begin leaking out through cracks in the official narrative. Dr. Sarah Mitchell discovered the first piece of evidence in 2019 while digitizing old magnetic tapes in a climate-controlled basement at the Johnson Space Center. She wasn't supposed to be there that Saturday morning, but a water pipe had burst in her apartment, and she decided to come into work rather than listen to the repairs. The tape was labeled simply as 69 restricted, tucked between routine medical telemetry recordings that nobody had bothered to review in decades. Sarah almost passed it by, but something about the faded red stamp marking it as restricted caught her attention. She loaded it onto the conversion equipment, put on her headphones, and pressed play. The first thing she heard was heavy breathing, then Buzz Aldrin's voice, tense and barely controlled, saying, "Neil, don't look directly at them. Keep moving toward the planned coordinates." Then Armstrong's response, steady but with an unmistakable edge of awe. "Houston, we have observers. They're watching us from the ridge. My God, they're enormous." The tape ran for exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds before cutting to static. Sarah's hands were shaking as she removed her headphones. She had worked at NASA for 12 years, had heard every conspiracy theory, every wild claim about what really happened during the Apollo missions. But this was different. This was Armstrong himself, on an authenticated NASA recording, describing something that had never appeared in any mission transcript. She made a digital copy, her fingers moving automatically while her mind raced. The timestamp matched perfectly with the famous communication blackout during the moonwalk, the one NASA had always attributed to an overheated transmitter. What Sarah didn't know was that 3,000 miles away in a retirement home in Scottsdale, Arizona, former Apollo program engineer Thomas Brennan was finally deciding to break his silence. At 93 years old, with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, he had nothing left to lose. He had carried the secret for over 50 years through a successful career, through raising 3 children, through the death of his wife. But now, with maybe weeks left to live, the weight of it was unbearable. He called his grandson Jake, who worked as a documentary filmmaker in Los Angeles. "I need to tell you something about Apollo 11, he said, his voice barely a whisper through the phone. "Can you bring your camera?" Jake arrived 2 days later to find his grandfather more alert than he'd been in months, as if the decision to finally speak had given him a surge of energy. They sat in Thomas's small room, the camera rolling as the old man began to speak. "I was in the secondary control room during the landing," he said, his eyes focused on something far beyond the walls. "We called it the Black Room. It was where we monitored the classified channels, the ones the public never knew existed. Every Apollo mission had dual communication systems, one for the public broadcast, one for situations that required immediate security classification." Thomas paused, taking a sip of water with trembling hands. When Armstrong and Aldrin landed, everything was normal at first. The celebrations in mission control, the relief that they'd made it safely. But then, about 15 minutes after landing, before they were scheduled to exit the lunar module, we started getting readings that didn't make sense. The onboard radar was picking up objects that shouldn't have been there. Large stationary objects positioned along the rim of a crater about 200 meters from the landing site. At first we thought it was a malfunction, maybe interference from the module's own systems. But then Armstrong activated the external camera for a systems check, and we saw that. Jake leaned forward, the camera steady on his grandfather's weathered face. "What did you see?" Thomas closed his eyes as if seeing it again in his memory. structures. That's the only word for 3 identical dome-shaped structures, each maybe 30 meters across, arranged in a perfect triangle. They were reflecting sunlight in a way that no natural formation could. The surface was smooth, almost glass-like, but with a subtle blue-green tint that seemed to pulse. And here's the thing that convinced us they weren't natural. They were generating heat, in the vacuum of space, in the shadow of the crater rim where the temperature should have been -73 degrees Celsius. These things were radiating heat at a steady 20 degrees. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the camera. Thomas continued. We had about 30 seconds of clear footage before someone, I never found out who, ordered the feed cut. The official story became that we were having technical difficulties. But in the black room, we kept monitoring. Armstrong and Aldrin were told to proceed with the moonwalk as planned, but to avoid any movement toward the structures. They were given a code phrase to use if they made visual contact. We have observers, and that's exactly what Armstrong said when he stepped onto the surface and could see them clearly without the module's window in the way. Sarah Mitchell, meanwhile, had spent 3 sleepless nights analyzing the tape she'd found. She'd run it through every audio enhancement program she could access, trying to pull more detail from the static-filled recording. On her 4th listen, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Behind Armstrong's voice, barely audible, was another, a low, rhythmic pulsing that audio analysis showed was at exactly 7.83 Hz. The same frequency as Earth's electromagnetic field, the Schumann resonance, but they were on the moon, where no such field should exist. Either something was generating that frequency artificially, or the recording had been made on Earth. But the latter was impossible. She had verified the tape's authenticity through 3 different methods. This was real. She decided to reach out to Dr. Marcus Webb, a former NASA physicist, who had worked on the Apollo communication systems and now taught at MIT. Marcus had always been known as a straight shooter, someone who didn't buy into Kinsa theories, but also didn't blindly accept official narratives. When Sarah played him the recording over an encrypted video call, his face went pale. Jesus Christ, he muttered. They told us that channel was destroyed in a fire. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, Sarah, I need to tell you something. In 1970, I was part of a team tasked with analyzing some unusual photographs from Apollo 11, not the ones released to the public, but images taken with a classified high-resolution camera that was installed in the service module. We were told the images were of geological formations that might indicate water ice, but that's not what they showed. Marcus pulled up a file on his computer, hesitated, then shared his screen. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It showed the lunar surface from about 100 meters up, taken during the command module's orbit, while Armstrong and Aldrin were on the surface. In the center of the frame were 3 perfectly circular depressions, each with what appeared to be a metallic dome at its center. We analyzed these for weeks, Marcus said. The domes were approximately 30 meters in diameter, made of something that had a different albedo than any known lunar material. But what really got our attention was this. He zoomed in on one of the domes. Around its base was a pattern of lines etched into the lunar soil, forming geometric shapes that looked almost like circuit boards. These patterns extended for hundreds of meters underground. According to our subsurface radar data, whatever these things were, they weren't just sitting on the surface. They were connected to something much larger beneath. Back in Arizona, Thomas Brennan was showing his grandson a worn notebook he'd kept hidden in a safety deposit box for decades. I wrote everything down, he said. Every communication, every anomaly, every order to destroy evidence. Look at this entry from July 24th. The day they left the moon, Jake read aloud. Collins reports visual confirmation of structures during orbital pass 47. Objects appear to be tracking command module movement. Decision made at highest levels to accelerate departure timeline. Houston orders all documentation of anomalies to be classified under Project Horizon Shield. Thomas nodded slowly. Michael Collins, orbiting alone while Armstrong and Aldrin were on the surface, saw more than anyone. He had nearly 2 days to observe and photograph those structures. He took hundreds of images that were immediately classified, but he told me something years later. After one too many drinks at a reunion, he said they weren't just structures. On his final orbit, just before they fired the engine to come home, he saw movement. Something large and metallic emerged from one of the domes, hovered for about 10 seconds, then returned. He said it moved unlike anything he'd ever seen. No visible propulsion, no exhaust, just smooth, controlled movement that defied physics as we understood it. The old man's eyes were bright with the fervor of finally unburdening himself. That's why we really stopped going to the moon, Jake. Not because of budget cuts or lack of public interest. We stopped because we were told to stop, not by Congress or the president, but by whatever intelligence was behind those structures. The last 3 Apollo missions, the ones that were canceled, they weren't canceled because of money. They were canceled because Apollo 17 received a transmission, a clear signal on a frequency that nothing on the moon should have been able to generate. The message was in binary, but when decoded, it was simple and in perfect English. Your presence is acknowledged. No further visits necessary. Sarah Mitchell had spent the last week correlating her discovery with other anomalies in the NASA archives. She found gaps in the telemetry data, missing photographs, and most tellingly, personnel records showing that 12 different Apollo program employees had been transferred to a classified project called Horizon Shield immediately after Apollo 11's return. None of them ever spoke publicly about their work again. She also discovered something curious in the budget records. Starting in 1970, NASA began allocating funds to something called lunar observation and analysis, but there were no corresponding missions or public programs. The money, nearly $500 million over 5 years, simply disappeared into black projects. Her investigation led her to a retired Air Force colonel named James Patterson, who had been liaison between NASA and the Pentagon during the Apollo program. Patterson was initially reluctant to speak, but when Sarah played him the Armstrong tape, his resolve crumbled. "We knew from the beginning there was something up there," he admitted, sitting in his home office, surrounded by space memorabilia. The Russians knew too. Luna 15, their unmanned probe that mysteriously crashed during Apollo 11's mission. It didn't crash. It was disabled. We tracked it, making a perfect approach to its landing site. Then suddenly all telemetry stopped. The Soviets never tried to land near that region again. Patterson showed Sarah a document that had been declassified but heavily redacted. This is from a National Security Council meeting on August 3, 1969. Just days after Apollo 11 returned. Look at the attendee list. Even with the redactions, she could make out representatives from NASA, the CIA, the Air Force, and surprisingly the Vatican. "The Vatican?" she asked. Patterson nodded grimly. "They sent a representative from the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Whatever Armstrong and Aldrin found up there, it was significant enough that they wanted religious consultation." The official was a Jesuit priest, named Father Giuseppe Martelli, who was also an astronomer. He stayed in Houston for 3 weeks, reviewing all the classified footage and data. As Sarah delved deeper, she found references to Father Martelli's report in Vatican archives that had been recently digitized. Most of it was in Latin and heavily coded, but one passage, translated, stood out. "The discovery necessitates a fundamental reconsideration of humanity's place in the divine cosmology. What was observed cannot be reconciled with natural formation, yet its presence predates human civilization by millennia. We must consider the theological implications of intelligence that is neither human nor divine in the traditional sense." Thomas Brennan was now showing his grandson the most damning piece of evidence he had saved. It was a photograph, taken with his personal camera, of a monitor in the black room. The image was slightly blurry but showed clear detail of one of the structures on the moon. But what made Jake's hands shake as he held it was what was visible in the background. Earth hung in the black sky, but between Earth and the moon was something else, a perfectly triangular object, massive in scale, clearly artificial, hovering in space. "This was taken during Apollo 12, Thomas said quietly. "This object appeared 4 times during different missions, always in the same position relative to Earth and Moon, as if it was monitoring the missions. We called it the Sentinel. Every crew that saw it was debriefed for hours and made to sign additional security oaths. Pete Conrad, Apollo 12's commander, told me it was the size of a city. It just hung there watching. The revelations were becoming overwhelming, but Thomas wasn't finished. You want to know the real kicker? Apollo 17, the last mission, brought something back, not just moon rocks. Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt found something at Taurus Littrow Valley, a piece of metal, clearly manufactured, embedded in rock that geological dating showed was over 50,000 years old. It had symbols on it, not unlike mathematical equations, but using a base 12 system instead of our base 10. That artifact is still being studied in a facility under Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I know because my signature is on the transfer documentation. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 2, where we'll explore what happened during the secret Apollo 18 mission that officially never existed, and the testimony of the astronauts who were silenced. Commander David Walker had been dead for 15 years, according to official records, killed in a classified aircraft testing accident at Groom Lake in 1975, but Sarah Mitchell was staring at a very much alive 78-year-old man sitting across from her in a diner outside Reno, Nevada. He had responded to her encrypted message sent through channels she didn't even know existed, until Marcus Webb had given her the access codes. Walker's hands were steady as he poured sugar into his coffee, but his eyes constantly scanned the parking lot through the window. I was commander of Apollo 18, he said quietly, words that should have been impossible since Apollo 17 was officially the last lunar mission. We launched on December 3, 1973 from Vandenberg Air Force Base, not Kennedy. Complete media blackout. Our mission was to investigate what you've been uncovering, to make direct contact if possible. Walker pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. They told our families we were on a classified military satellite deployment. Even my wife didn't know I went to the moon. Still doesn't. She thinks I've been in witness protection all these years because of some Soviet spy thing. He opened the journal to a page covered in sketches and coordinates. We landed here, Mare Orientale, the far side, about 300 kilometers from where the Chinese would land their probe decades later. But we weren't there for geological surveys. We were there because something had been transmitting from that location. A signal that repeated every 12.7 hours, perfectly timed. It had been transmitting since we first started monitoring in 1968. The drawings in Walker's journal showed a landscape unlike any official lunar photograph. Amid the usual craters and regolith were structures that looked almost organic, flowing shapes that seemed to have grown from the lunar surface rather than been built upon it. My lunar module pilot was Lieutenant Colonel Michael Reynolds, and our command module pilot was Major Jennifer Ashford, though her involvement was completely scrubbed from any record. First woman in space, years before Sally Ride, but the world will never know. Walker's voice carried a mixture of pride and bitterness. We trained for 18 months in complete isolation at a facility in Alaska. They brought in linguists, xenobiologists, even philosophers. They were preparing us for contact, though they never said it directly. Sarah leaned forward, her recorder running, though she wondered if she'd ever be able to use this testimony. What did you find? Walker was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. We found answers that created more questions. The source of the transmission was a structure unlike the domes Apollo 11 encountered. This was a spire, maybe 200 meters tall, made of something that looked like black glass but was harder than anything we could measure. It was partially buried, and from the erosion patterns, our best guess was it had been there for at least 100,000 years. But here's the thing that changed everything. It was active. Lights moving inside it, energy readings off the charts, and it was warm, in the permanent shadow of a crater where nothing should have been warm. This thing was generating heat. He turned a page in his journal, revealing more detailed sketches. Reynolds and I approached it, while Ashford maintained orbit. About 50 meters from the spire, our suits started acting up, not malfunctioning, but enhancing. Our oxygen consumption dropped by half. Our heating systems went into standby because we didn't need them anymore. And strangest of all, our radio communication became crystal clear, No static, as if something was filtering and boosting the signal. Then Reynolds said something I'll never forget. He said, "Commander, I can hear them thinking." Walker's eyes met Sarah's. I thought he was having a breakdown, space madness or something. But then I heard it too. Not voices, not language as we know it, but concepts, ideas, flowing directly into our minds. They were trying to communicate, but our brains couldn't fully process it. The closest I can describe is like trying to download a modern video file on a computer from the 1960s. We had the basic hardware to receive it, but not the processing power to understand most of it. But some things came through clearly. Images of Earth from different time periods, some showing ice ages, others showing configurations of continents that didn't match any geological era we knew. And always, there were craft in these images, watching, recording. The diner had emptied around them, leaving only the soft hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Walker continued, "We spent 6 hours at the spy. During that time, we experienced what I can only call downloads. Information pushed directly into our consciousness. Most of it was beyond our comprehension, but what we could understand was profound. They, whatever they were, had been monitoring Earth for millions of years. We weren't their first interest. They had watched countless species rise and fall. The dinosaurs, earlier mammals we haven't even discovered yet. Humanity was just the latest in a long line of observed subjects." Sarah interrupted. "Did you see them? The actual beings?" Walker shook his head, not directly, but Reynolds claimed he saw silhouettes inside the spire. Tall, impossibly thin, moving in ways that suggested more than 4 limbs. I saw movement, shadows that didn't match any light source we could identify. But the clearest communication came. We were preparing to leave. As we walked back to the lunar module, symbols appeared in the dust ahead of us. Not carved or drawn, but like the regolith itself had rearranged at a molecular level. Mathematical equations, star charts, and what appeared to be a warning. He pulled out a photograph, faded and creased. It showed symbols in the lunar dust, photographed from about 2 meters away. The symbols were intricate, combining geometric shapes with flowing curves. We had our best cryptographers work on these for years. The star chart was pointing to a system about 82 light-years away, in the constellation Aquarius. The mathematical equations were beyond our understanding, but they seemed to relate to dimensional physics, suggesting space and time aren't constructed the way we think they are. But the warning was clearer. It showed Earth, then multiple craft arriving, then Earth going dark. The message seemed to be that we weren't ready for open contact, that premature exposure to their technology or presence would lead to our destruction, not through their actions, but through our own. Walker closed his journal. When we returned to the command module, Ashford was in shock. She had been monitoring us, but also tracking multiple objects that had appeared around the moon during our surface expedition. She counted at least 12 craft, each one different, as if representatives from different origins were observing our contact with the spire. She managed to photograph 3 of them before they vanished. Not flew away, just vanished, like turning off a light. The photographs were confiscated immediately upon our return, but she had made sketches from memory. He showed Sarah another page, this one containing detailed drawings of 3 distinct craft. One was triangular, similar to what Thomas Brennan had described. Another was spherical, but appeared to be made of interconnected hexagonal segments. The third was organic-looking, asymmetrical, more like something grown than built. Each one was massive, Walker explained. Based on our radar readings, the smallest was at least 1 kilometer across. They stayed for exactly 1 hour after we left the surface, then disappeared simultaneously. The revelation that hung heaviest in the air came next. "We brought something back," Walker said, his voice dropping even lower. "Not intentional." When we returned to Earth, during the medical examinations, they found that our brain chemistry had been altered. New neural pathways had formed, connections that shouldn't have been possible. Reynolds started having visions, seeing events before they happened. Minor things at first, then larger ones. He predicted the Challenger disaster down to the date and time, tried to warn NASA, but they dismissed him as having a psychological breakdown. He killed himself in 1985, left a note saying he couldn't handle seeing the future anymore. Sarah's mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. What about Jennifer Ashford? Walker's expression darkened. They relocated her to Australia in 1974, gave her a new identity, but she kept trying to tell people what we'd seen. Last I heard, she was institutionalized in the early 90s. The official story was schizophrenia, but I know better. She was completely sane. She just couldn't live with the lie. She sent me letters for years, always in code. In one of them she said she was still receiving the downloads. That information was still being transmitted to her mind. She claimed she could understand more of it as time went on. That human consciousness was evolving to be able to process their communications. Walker pulled out one of Ashford's letters, the handwriting cramped but precise. Sarah read, "David, the resonance is increasing. I can feel others now, not just the three of us, but dozens, maybe hundreds. All the people who have had contact, direct or indirect. We're being prepared for something. The year 2027 keeps appearing in my visions. Something significant happens then. The barrier between us and them becomes thinner. They're not coming. They've always been here. We're just becoming capable of perceiving them properly." The implications were staggering. Sarah asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" Walker smiled sadly. "Because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. Same as your source, Thomas Brennan." Interesting coincidence, isn't it? Almost everyone who had prolonged contact with their technology develops the same cancer, usually about 40 to 50 years later. It's like a timer was set in our bodies. Reynolds had it too before he took his own life. The doctors can't explain it. The cancer cells are unlike typical mutations. They're organized, almost purposeful, as if our bodies are being recycled for something else. As their conversation drew to a close, Walker made one final revelation. There were 2 more missions after ours. Apollo 19 and 20, even more classified. I don't know all the details, but I know Apollo 20 brought something back. Not just artifacts or altered astronauts, but technology. A piece of one of their craft, recovered from the far side. It's been studied for decades in a facility beneath the Nevada desert. Some of our modern breakthroughs, quantum computing, certain aspects of genetic engineering, even some of the current AI developments, they're all reverse engineered from that technology. But we're children playing with tools we don't understand. Every advancement brings us closer to something, but nobody knows if it's enlightenment or catastrophe. Before leaving, Walker handed Sarah a small metal cylinder. "This contains all my documentation, photos, mission recordings that I managed to copy before they were classified. But be careful, the moment you open this, you'll be on their radar. Not the aliens, but the very human organizations that have kept this secret for 50 years. They've killed for less than what's in this cylinder." As Sarah drove away from the diner, she noticed a black sedan following her at a distance. Walker's warning was already coming true, but she also noticed something else. A sensation she'd been feeling more frequently since discovering the Armstrong tape. A presence in her mind, not threatening but observing, as if something was watching her investigation with interest, perhaps even approval. That night, in her motel room, Sarah opened the cylinder. Inside were photographs that would rewrite history, recordings that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe, and documents that revealed a conspiracy so vast, it made every other cover-up look like child's play. But what struck her most was a single photograph at the bottom of the collection. It showed the Earth from the moon's surface, but in the foreground was an astronaut's footprint, and next to it, another print, clearly not human, with an elongated shape, and what appeared to be 7 toes. The photo was labeled simply "First Contact, December 6, 1973. They were there first. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 3. where we'll uncover what happened to the astronauts who tried to reveal the truth in the underground lunar base that NASA has been secretly monitoring since 1976. Dr. Robert Hastings had performed over 300 autopsies during his career as chief medical examiner for the state of New Mexico, but nothing had prepared him for what he found inside the body of former astronaut James McDivitt in March of 1987. McDivitt, commander of Apollo 9, had officially died of a heart attack while hiking near Taos. But when Hastings opened the chest cavity, he discovered something that made him immediately seal the morgue and call a number he'd been given years earlier for situations that fell outside normal parameters. The heart was intact, showing no signs of infarction, but wrapped around it was a crystalline structure, like a web of glass fibers that had grown through the cardiac tissue. Under microscopic examination, these fibers showed properties that defied known biology. They were organic but contained elements not found on Earth, arranged in patterns that suggested they had been engineered rather than evolved. Hastings would later testify in a closed congressional hearing that he found similar structures in 12 other bodies over the next 5 years, all former NASA personnel who had worked on the Apollo program. Sarah Mitchell sat in a secure room at Georgetown University, interviewing Dr. Hastings, who had agreed to speak after 37 years of silence. "They threatened my family," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he showed her photographs he'd hidden for decades. After the McDivitt autopsy, men from the Defense Intelligence Agency arrived within hours. They confiscated the body, all my samples, my notes, everything. But I had already made copies, hidden them. I knew something extraordinary was happening, and I couldn't let it disappear into some classified vault. The photographs showed the crystalline structures in disturbing detail, geometric patterns that looked almost like circuit boards made of living tissue. Every person I examined who had these structures had one thing in common: they had all been trying to go public with information about what was really found during the Apollo missions. Hastings pulled out a list of names, each with a date and cause of death. "Look at the pattern." Gordon Cooper tried to hold a press conference in 1981 about UFO encounters during Mercury and Gemini missions. Died of sudden cardiac failure 2 days before. James Irwin, Apollo 15, wrote a manuscript about structures on the moon. Suffered 3 heart attacks in 2 years despite being in perfect health. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, was more successful in speaking out, but notice how his message was always diluted, dismissed as eccentricity. "He told me once that every time he tried to reveal specific details he would experience blinding headaches and memory gaps. It was as if something was editing his ability to communicate certain information." The evidence Hastings presented painted a picture of systematic silencing, but not through conventional means. The crystalline structures weren't killing them directly, he explained. They were more like biological monitors, possibly transmitters. When these individuals attempted to reveal certain information, the structures would activate, sometimes causing heart problems, sometimes strokes, sometimes aggressive cancers that appeared literally overnight. But here's what really disturbed me. In 3 cases, I found evidence that the structures had been attempting to preserve the host, even while terminating them. As if whatever intelligence was behind this wanted to harvest something from these people, their memories perhaps, or their altered consciousness. Sarah had been following similar patterns in her investigation. She showed Hastings her own files, including interviews with family members of deceased NASA personnel. Martha Cooper, Gordon's widow, had told her about her husband's final days. He kept saying they were in his head, that he could feel them watching through his eyes. The doctors said it was paranoia, but Gordon was the sanest man I ever knew. The night before he died, he told me that going to the moon had been humanity's greatest achievement and its biggest mistake. He said we knocked on a door we weren't supposed to know existed, and something answered. The conversation turned to those who had survived their attempts to reveal the truth. Dr. Hastings had maintained contact with several of them over the years, operating as an informal support network for people whose experiences had left them forever changed. There's a woman in Oregon, Dr. Patricia Wells, who worked as a photo analyst for NASA during Apollo. She discovered something in the images from Apollo 15 that she says fundamentally altered her understanding of reality. She tried to publish her findings in 1978, but within days of submitting her paper she began experiencing what she calls dimensional shifts. She would see multiple versions of reality overlapping, past and future events occurring simultaneously. The symptoms only stopped when she withdrew her paper and signed a new confidentiality agreement that specifically mentioned non-terrestrial biological entities and their technological artifacts. Sarah traveled to Oregon the following week to meet Patricia Wells. The 74-year-old woman lived in a modest house surrounded by Douglas firs, its interior walls covered with astronomical charts and mathematical equations. Patricia's eyes had an unsettling quality, as if she was seeing something beyond the immediate environment. "You want to know what I found in those photos?" she asked, leading Sarah to a hidden room behind a bookshelf. The room was lined with lead sheeting and copper mesh, what Patricia called a Faraday cage. "It's the only place where I can think clearly without their influence," she explained. Inside were hundreds of photographs, originals from the Apollo missions that she had somehow managed to retain. She pulled out a series of images from Apollo 15's orbital photography. "Look at this sequence, taken over Hadley Rill. Frame by frame you can see something moving beneath the surface. It's subtle. You need to adjust the contrast and overlay multiple exposures. But there's definitely something there. A network of tunnels, massive ones. Some of them kilometers wide. But that's not the remarkable part." She produced another set of images, these showing the same area but taken by Apollo 17 2 years later. The tunnel configurations had changed. They had been restructured, expanded. Something was actively building down there during the time between missions. Patricia's most shocking revelation came from comparing orbital photography with surface images. Every landing site was specifically chosen not for its geological interest, but for its proximity to these underground networks. NASA knew they were there. The astronauts were actually investigating entrance points, though most of them didn't know it. Only the commanders were fully briefed. "Look at this photo from Apollo 6. John Young is standing next to what appears to be a boulder, but enhance it and you can see it's actually a sealed entrance, with symbols that match those found at other sites. The same symbols appeared in my dreams for years after I discovered them." The psychological impact on those who knew the truth was profound. Patricia introduced Sarah to a support group that met monthly via encrypted video conference. There were 17 members, all former NASA employees or contractors who had encountered evidence of extraterrestrial presence during the Apollo program. Dr. Raymond Chen, a former trajectory specialist, shared his experience. "After Apollo 11, I was tasked with analyzing an anomaly in the command module's return path. Something had altered its trajectory, very slightly, but enough that we had to make corrections. When I investigated, I found that the module had been scanned by an energy beam of unknown origin. The beam had slightly increased the module's mass by approximately 2.3 kilograms. Material analysis showed that new elements had been integrated into the hull, elements with atomic structures we couldn't identify. It was as if something had marked the craft, tagged it for tracking." Another member, Jennifer Rodriguez, had worked in the lunar receiving laboratory where moon rocks were first analyzed. "We found more than just rocks," she said, her voice shaking even after 40 years. "There were artifacts, small ones, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. Microscopic spheres made of an alloy we couldn't replicate, containing what appeared to be data storage matrices. When we exposed them to certain frequencies, they would emit patterns of light that looked like holographic star maps, but these maps showed stellar positions from different time periods, some from millions of years ago, others from what we calculated to be thousands of years in the future. We were ordered to list them as crystalline inclusions of no special significance." The group's de facto leader was Marcus Thompson, a former mission planner who had worked on all the Apollo missions. "We need to understand that the cover-up isn't just about hiding alien presence," he explained. "It's about hiding the fact that human consciousness itself was altered by contact with their technology. Every person who spent significant time analyzing the real data, the unfiltered information from the moon, experienced cognitive changes, enhanced pattern recognition, precognitive episodes, the ability to perceive electromagnetic fields. We were evolving or being evolved into something new. The government didn't just hide aliens, they hid the fact that contact had already begun changing our species. Thompson revealed that there was an entire classification of personnel within NASA and the intelligence community known as affected individuals or AIs. These were people whose exposure to lunar artifacts or data had resulted in measurable consciousness alteration. There's a facility in Utah where about 200 of us are monitored. We go in for annual evaluations, brain scans, genetic testing. They're tracking how the changes progress, how they might be passed to our children. My daughter, who was born 5 years after my exposure to the Apollo 11 data, has an IQ of 180 and can solve mathematical problems that stump PhD professors. She also has dreams about places she's never been, describes in perfect detail the surface of the moon despite never seeing classified photos. Sarah's investigation led her to Dr. Harold Finch, a neuroscientist who had been secretly studying the affected individuals for 3 decades. Finch, dying of the same rare cancer that had claimed so many Apollo personnel, decided to share his findings. The alterations aren't random, he explained from his hospice bed. They follow a pattern that suggests directed evolution. The changes enhance abilities that would be necessary for interspecies communication and understanding of advanced physics. It's as if we're being prepared for something, upgraded to be able to interface with their technology or consciousness. The cancer that kills us, I believe it's a failsafe. If we don't achieve successful integration by a certain age, the biological changes become fatal. We're prototypes, and not all prototypes are meant to survive. Finch's research had identified specific genetic markers that appeared in all affected individuals, markers that didn't exist in the general population before 1969. These markers are spreading, he said, through reproduction. They're entering the broader gene pool. By my calculations, within 3 generations, approximately 15% of humanity will carry these markers. We're witnessing the beginning of a species-wide transformation, initiated by our contact with whatever intelligence exists on the moon. The implications were staggering, but Finch had one more revelation. In 2018, I was approached by representatives of what they called the Continuation Committee, a group within the government tasked with preparing for the next phase of contact. They showed me intercepted communications from the moon, signals that have been increasing in frequency and complexity since 2015. The intelligence there is preparing for something scheduled to occur in 2027. They wouldn't tell me what, but they're accelerating certain black projects, building underground facilities, and most tellingly, they're identifying and recruiting affected individuals' children. They're creating a generation they believe will be capable of direct interface with non-human intelligence. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 4, where we'll explore the secret lunar monitoring station that's been operating since 1976, and the shocking discovery made by the Chinese Chang'e missions that forced a new international cooperation protocol. The coordinates were never supposed to exist in any official database, yet Sarah Mitchell found herself staring at them on a classified document dated April 15, 1976. Lunar Station Alpha, Mare Crisium 27.3 Shan, 56.1 D. Operational status active. Personnel rotating crew of 6. Mission duration indefinite. The document had come from retired Air Force Colonel Harrison Blake, who contacted Sarah after hearing about her investigation through the underground network of Apollo whistleblowers. Blake had spent 3 months at what he called the most important and most secret installation ever created by mankind, a fully operational monitoring station on the moon that had been continuously manned since the public Apollo program supposedly ended. Blake met Sarah at an abandoned aircraft hangar in Montana, a location he chose for its distance from any surveillance equipment. At 81 years old, his body showed the telltale signs of the exposure cancer that affected so many who had contact with lunar anomalies. But his mind remained sharp. "I was part of Operation Silent Watch," he began, pulling out a case containing photographs and documents that should have been destroyed decades ago. Officially, I was listed as killed in a training accident in 1976. In reality, I was launched from Diego Garcia on a modified Saturn V that the public never knew existed. There were 12 of these launches between 1975 and 1982, all taking personnel and supplies to establish and maintain humanity's first permanent off-world installation. The photographs Blake showed were extraordinary. They depicted the interior of a habitat module built into a natural cave system in Mare, with viewports looking out onto the lunar surface. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, and in several images suited figures could be seen working at control stations. Our primary mission was to monitor the alien installations on the far side, Blake explained. By 1976 we had identified 43 separate structures, 12 of which showed regular activity. The base was positioned to maintain constant surveillance while remaining hidden from Earth-based telescopes. We used the cave system to shield us from radiation but also to hide our heat signature from their sensors. Blake's account of daily life at Lunar Station Alpha was both mundane and extraordinary. We followed a strict routine: 8-hour shifts monitoring the equipment, 4 hours of maintenance and airsis, 4 hours of personal time, 8 hours sleep. But those monitoring shifts, we saw things that redefined everything. I thought I knew about our place in the universe. Craft coming and going from the structures, some arriving from deep space, others emerging from underground hangars we hadn't even known existed. We tracked vessels that would materialize near Jupiter, cross the solar system in hours, and dock at the lunar facilities. The energy readings from these arrivals were off the scale, suggesting propulsion systems that bent space-time rather than moving through it. The most significant discovery came 6 weeks into Blake's rotation. We detected a massive object moving beneath the lunar surface, approximately 2 kilometers below the Orientale basin. It was moving in a grid pattern, methodically scanning or possibly mining. The object was enormous, at least 5 kilometers long, and generated a magnetic field that interfered with our equipment whenever it passed nearby. We designated it Leviathan. Over the 3 months I was there, we tracked its movements, and realized it was following a pattern that would take approximately 11 years to complete a full survey of the moon's interior. It had probably been doing this for centuries, maybe longer. Blake revealed that the station maintained communication with Earth through a quantum entanglement system that had been reverse-engineered from recovered alien technology. Instantaneous communication, no signal to intercept, no delay. We reported directly to a facility beneath Cheyenne Mountain, where a team of analysts processed our observations. They were particularly interested in patterns, trying to determine if the alien activity followed predictable cycles. What we discovered was that their operations increased significantly during certain astronomical alignments, particularly when Earth, Moon, and specific star systems were in conjunction. It suggested they were using these alignments for navigation, or possibly communication with their origin points. The psychological toll on the station's crew was severe. Blake showed Sarah medical records that documented the effects of prolonged exposure to what they termed xenological stress. It wasn't just the isolation or the danger, he explained. It was the constant awareness that we were being watched in return. They knew we were there. Sometimes their craft would hover directly over our installation, scanning us with energies we couldn't identify. During these encounters, the entire crew would experience shared consciousness events, sudden access to each other's thoughts and memories. It was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. We were being studied as much as we were studying them. One incident stood out in Blake's memory with particular clarity. On Soyuz 73 of my rotation, that's the 73rd lunar day, we observed a gathering. 17 different craft converged on the primary structure in Tsiolkovsky crater. They arranged themselves in a perfect geometric pattern and remained stationary for 14 hours. During this time, our instruments detected a form of communication, not radio or any electromagnetic radiation we knew, but gravitational waves modulated in complex patterns. Dr. Patricia Huang, our science officer, managed to record these patterns. When she ran them through our computers, they resolved into mathematical proofs, some proving theorems we had theorized but never solved, others describing mathematical concepts we didn't have frameworks for. It was like attending a lecture by beings whose understanding of reality was millennia ahead of ours. The station crew made another disturbing discovery. In a lava tube system near their location, they found evidence of a previous human presence, but not from any known mission. "We found bodies," Blake said quietly. 3 of them in Soviet-era suits, but with modifications we didn't recognize. They had been there for at least a decade, perfectly preserved in the vacuum. But here's the unsettling part. Their mission patches showed a program that supposedly never existed. Luna 24B, dated 1968. The Soviets had gotten there before Apollo 11, had encountered something, and never made it home. We found their landing module 2 kilometers away. It had been dissected, taken apart with surgical precision, every component carefully separated and arranged, as if something had been studying our technology. Blake revealed that similar discoveries had been made at other locations. The Chinese found an American craft in 2013 during their Chang'e 3 mission, a modified surveyor probe that had been launched in secret in 1967. It had been captured and was being held in what we can only describe as a specimen collection, alongside craft from at least 4 other civilizations we couldn't identify. We were just the latest species to reach the moon and find that it was already occupied, had been occupied since before human civilization began. The international cooperation that emerged from these discoveries was unprecedented but completely hidden from public view. Blake produced documents showing agreements between the United States, Soviet Union, China and the European Space Agency, all coordinating their public space programs to avoid certain areas of the moon while secretly sharing information about the alien presence. The Chinese Chang'e 4 landing on the far side in 2019 wasn't exploration, Blake explained. It was negotiation. They had received a transmission, an invitation to send an unmanned probe to a specific location. What they found there led to the current acceleration in lunar programs worldwide. Every major power is now racing not to establish lunar bases for resource extraction or national prestige, but to prepare for what's coming in 2027. Blake's final revelation concerned the fate of Lunar Station Alpha. In 1982, we received an ultimatum not through our monitoring equipment, but delivered in person. 3 beings materialized inside our habitat, passing through solid rock, as if it didn't exist. They were roughly humanoid but taller, perhaps 8 feet, with elongated skulls and skin that seemed to shift between solid and translucent. They communicated telepathically, showing us images of the station being peacefully decommissioned, all personnel returning safely to Earth. The alternative, also shown in vivid detail, was the complete sterilization of the lunar surface, removing all traces of human presence. We had 72 hours to begin evacuation. The evacuation was completed in record time, with the last personnel leaving on a mission designated Apollo 23, which officially never existed. The station was left intact as per the agreement, its equipment still functioning, still transmitting data to Earth. It's still operational, Blake confirmed. Automated systems have been monitoring and reporting for over 40 years. The data stream is received at 3 locations: Pine Gap in Australia, a facility beneath the Atacama Desert in Chile, and somewhere in the Himalayas, though I was never told the exact location. The information gathered has shaped every major policy decision about space exploration since the 1980s. Sarah asked the obvious question about why the public moon missions were resuming. If humanity had been warned off, Blake's answer was chilling. Because they invited us back, starting in 2020. The signals from the moon changed. Instead of warnings, we began receiving what can only be described as tutorials, instructions for building technologies we don't yet understand, mathematical proofs that would advance our physics by centuries, and most importantly, star charts showing the locations of other inhabited worlds. But every transmission ends with the same countdown, a timer that expires on September 23, 2027. Something happens then, something they've been preparing us for since we first set foot on the moon. Blake showed Sarah one final document, a transcript of the last transmission received before he broke contact with his handlers. It was a message in perfect English, Chinese, Russian and Hindi simultaneously, a feat that should have been technically impossible. The message read, "Your species has passed the preliminary observation period. Secondary evaluation commences upon the next solar maximum. Prepare your selected representatives. The quarantine will be lifted for those who have demonstrated compatibility. Your evolution from type 0 to type 1 consciousness will be assisted or prevented based on the collective response of your species to full disclosure. The choice has always been yours, but the time for choosing approaches." As their meeting concluded, Blake gave Sarah a sealed envelope. "Don't open this until September 1st, 2027. It contains the coordinates of a safe location and instructions for what to do when the disclosure event occurs. There are those of us who have been preparing for decades, building shelters not from physical threats, but from the psychological shock that will come when humanity realizes it's not alone, has never been alone, and is about to join a community of intelligence that spans the galaxy. Not everyone will handle the transition well. The cancer that's killing me is nothing compared to what unprepared minds will experience when the veil is lifted. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 5, where we'll uncover the true purpose of the Space Force and the discovery that changed everything. The moon itself is artificial. Dr. Mikhail Volkov had been studying lunar seismic data for 43 years, but the readings from November 12, 2021, made him question everything he thought he knew about Earth's companion. The seismic sensors left by Apollo missions, still functioning after 5 decades, had detected something that shouldn't exist. A perfect geometric pattern of vibrations emanating from the moon's core, repeating every 4.7 hours with mechanical precision. Volkov, working at the Russian Academy of Sciences in Novosibirsk, cross-referenced the data with readings from Chinese and European sensors. The pattern was consistent across all instruments. The moon was ringing like a bell, but not from any natural phenomena. Something inside it was generating these vibrations, something that had activated after centuries or millennia of dormancy. Sarah Mitchell met Volkov through an encrypted video link, his face gaunt from the same cancer that seemed to plague everyone who delved too deep into lunar mysteries. "I've spent my entire career studying what we call lunar transient phenomena," he began, his English heavily accented but precise. "Most scientists dismiss them as outgassing or electrostatic discharges, but I knew better. The patterns were too regular, too purposeful. In 1969, when Apollo 12 deliberately crashed their lunar module into the surface, the moon rang for over an hour. NASA said it was due to the moon's composition, but the reverberations were unlike anything a natural body should produce. It rang like it was hollow, or more accurately, like it contained vast empty spaces arranged in geometric patterns." Volkov shared his screen, showing complex mathematical models. "Using 50 years of seismic data, I've mapped the moon's interior structure. What I found defies conventional geology. There are massive cavities arranged in perfect mathematical ratios, following the Fibonacci sequence. These aren't random caves or lava tubes. They're precisely engineered spaces, some large enough to contain entire cities. But more disturbing is what's at the center. The core isn't molten iron as we'd expect. It's a structured mass of unknown composition that generates a steady electromagnetic pulse. The moon isn't just inhabited. The moon itself is artificial, a constructed object disguised as a natural satellite." This revelation aligned with information Sarah had received from General Patricia Hayes, the deputy commander of the United States Space Force. Hayes, dying from the same mysterious cancer, had agreed to one meeting in a secure facility beneath Peterson Air Force Base. "The Space Force wasn't created to protect satellites from China or Russia," Hayes had said, her voice weak but determined. "It was created because we detected massive objects moving between Earth and the Moon, objects that had been dormant for centuries but began activating in 2018. The public announcement of the Space Force was cover for the largest military mobilization in human history, not against any terrestrial enemy, but in preparation for contact with whoever built the moon." Hayes had shown Sarah classified imagery from the James Webb Space Telescope, images that would never be released to the public. They showed structures at the moon's L4 and L5 Lagrange points, massive constructs that had been invisible to earlier telescopes but were revealed by Webb's infrared capabilities. These stations have been there all along, hidden by some form of adaptive camouflage that only failed when we achieved certain technological capabilities. It's as if they wanted to be discovered, but only when we reached a specific level of development. Each structure is approximately 50 kilometers in diameter, and they're growing. Construction or expansion has been accelerating since 2020. Volkov continued his presentation showing data that corroborated Hayes's information. The moon's orbital characteristics have always been suspicious to those who looked closely. It's exactly the right size and distance to perfectly eclipse the sun, a mathematical coincidence that's astronomically improbable. Its rotation is precisely synchronized to always show the same face to Earth. But here's what nobody talks about. The moon is slowly adjusting its orbit, not drifting away as tidal forces would suggest, but making corrections, maintaining specific geometric relationships with Earth and Sun. Something is piloting our moon. Has been for millions of years. The Russian scientist pulled up another set of data. This from the Kaguya probe launched by Japan. The Japanese found something extraordinary but were pressured to suppress it. Beneath the ocean of storms, their radar detected a perfect grid of tunnels, each exactly 3.7 kilometers wide, extending for thousands of kilometers. The tunnels form a transportation network, connecting all the major anomalous sites on the moon. But these aren't ancient abandoned passages. Kaguya detected electromagnetic signatures, suggesting active use. Something moves through these tunnels regularly, massive objects traveling at speeds that would be impossible on the surface. Sarah had independently confirmed this, through leaked documents from the Indian Space Research Organization. Their Chandrayaan-2 mission had detected similar tunnel systems, but more importantly, they had recorded what appeared to be mining operations in the South Pole Aitken Basin. Helium-3 extraction, the report had stated, but using methods we cannot replicate. The extraction rate suggests they could harvest the entire lunar supply within 200 years. The report's conclusion was stark. The moon's resources are being systematically harvested by non-human intelligence for purposes unknown. Volkov revealed his most disturbing discovery. In 2019, I was invited to a closed conference in Antarctica, officially about climate change effects on ice sheet stability. In reality, it was a gathering of scientists who had discovered evidence that the moon's influence on Earth goes far beyond time. The moon generates specific electromagnetic data frequencies that affect human consciousness. These frequencies have been increasing in intensity since 1969. When humans first made physical contact with the lunar surface. We're being altered, programmed, prepared for something. The conference had included neuroscientists who presented evidence that human brain evolution had accelerated dramatically in the last 50 years, with new neural pathways appearing that seemed designed for processing complex mathematical and spatial concepts. Children born after 2012 show remarkable abilities, Volkov explained. Pattern recognition, quantum mathematical intuition, and most remarkably a form of collective consciousness. Put 5 of these children in a room with a complex problem, and they solve it together without speaking, their brains synchronizing in ways we don't understand. The moon's frequencies are triggering these changes. It's upgrading our species. This information corresponded with what Sarah had learned from Dr. Amanda Chen, a geneticist working for a black project within the National Institutes of Health. Chen had discovered that human DNA was responding to the lunar lunacies, with certain dormant genes activating in predictable patterns. These genes shouldn't exist, Chen had told her. They contain instructions for proteins that have no evolutionary purpose on Earth, but they would be essential for surviving in different gravitational fields, different atmospheric compositions, even different radiation environments. It's as if our DNA contains a toolkit for becoming interplanetary, and the moon is switching it on. Volkov's research had led him to a radical conclusion. The moon was placed in Earth orbit approximately 4.5 billion years ago, precisely when life began to emerge on our planet. It's not a captured asteroid or a chunk of Earth blown off by an impact. It's a monitoring station, a control mechanism, and an evolutionary catalyst, all in one. Whoever built it has been guiding life on Earth from the beginning, and now they're preparing us for the next phase. The evidence for the moon's artificial nature extended beyond scientific data. Sarah had interviewed members of remote viewing programs from both the US and Soviet Union, who had independently described the same visions: vast, mechanical spaces inside the moon, beings that existed partially in our dimension and partially in others, and most consistently, a massive crystalline structure at the moon's exact center that seemed to be both a power source and a consciousness, aware and watching. One remote viewer, Colonel James Patterson, had described touching this consciousness during a session in 1978. It was ancient beyond measure, patient, and utterly alien. But it knew us, had been watching every human who ever looked up at the night sky. It showed me images of Earth's history, mass extinctions that weren't random but planned, evolutionary leaps that were guided. We're not a random accident, we're a project, and we're approaching graduation or termination. The Space Force's true mission, as Hayes had revealed, was to prepare for what they called the emergence event. Our analysis suggests that on September 23, 2027, the moon will reveal its true nature. The camouflage will drop. The structures will become visible to everyone on Earth, simultaneously. Imagine 6 billion people suddenly realizing that the moon they've looked at their entire lives is a giant spacecraft or observation platform. The psychological impact alone could collapse civilization. That's why we're preparing, not for invasion, but for revelation. Volkov had one final piece of evidence, something he'd never shared before. In March 2022, all the seismic sensors on the moon detected something unprecedented: a voice, encoded in the vibrations, speaking in a language that our AI systems identified as Proto-Indo-European, the theoretical root of all human languages. When translated, it said, "The harvest period concludes. Evaluation complete. Species viability confirmed. Initiation of next phase approved by the Council. Prepare. The selected." This message repeated for exactly 1 hour, then never again. The implications were staggering. Sarah asked Volkov what he thought would happen in 2027. His answer was sobering. Based on all the data, the patterns, the accelerating changes, I believe the moon will open. Not metaphorically, but literally. Those vast spaces inside will be revealed, and we'll discover that we've been living next to a populated world all along. The beings inside have been waiting for us to reach a specific technological and consciousness threshold. We're almost there. The question isn't whether they'll reveal themselves, but whether humanity is ready for the truth that we've never been alone, that our entire evolution has been guided, and that what we call natural selection has been anything but natural. As the conversation ended, Volkov shared a final thought. "You know what convinced me more than any data that the moon is artificial? Its beauty. The way it lights our nights, controls our tides, stabilizes our axis. It's too perfect, too beneficial to life on Earth. Nature is rarely so generous without purpose. Someone wanted Earth to develop complex life, wanted it to evolve intelligence, and they placed the moon there to ensure it happened. We're about to meet our gardeners, and I pray they're satisfied with what has grown in their garden." Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 6, where we'll explore the secret Antarctic excavation that uncovered technology matching the lunar structures and the countdown protocol for first contact. The drilling had stopped at exactly 347 meters beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, when Dr. Carlos Mendoza's team hit something that shouldn't exist. It was January 14, 2023, at the classified Vostok Station 2, located 70 kilometers from the original Russian research station. The drill bit, designed to cut through solid ice and rock, had suddenly encountered a material that not only resisted penetration but began to emit a low-frequency hum that resonated through the entire ice shelf. Within hours, the site was locked down by a joint military force comprising American, Russian, Chinese, and European special operations units. What they had found would confirm the greatest fear and hope of those who knew about the lunar structures. Earth itself contained matching technology, dormant for millennia, now awakening in response to signals from the moon. Sarah Mitchell had learned about the Antarctic discovery through Dr. Mendoza himself, who had fled to Chile after developing aggressive cancer just 3 months after the initial discovery. They met in a small cafe in Punta Arenas, where Mendoza, his body ravaged by the disease, handed her a flash drive containing everything he had documented before the site was seized. "We were supposedly doing climate research, studying ancient ice to understand atmospheric conditions from millions of years ago," he began, his voice hoarse. "But the real mission was to investigate gravitational anomalies detected by satellite. Something massive was buried under the ice, something that was generating its own gravitational field independent of its mass. That's physically impossible unless the object is artificially manipulating space-time." The photographs on the flash drive were astounding. They showed a perfectly smooth, black surface, similar to obsidian but with a subtle iridescence that shifted colors depending on the angle of observation. The material was identical to samples recovered from the moon, Mendoza explained. "Not similar, identical, down to the molecular level. But here's what made everyone panic. When we exposed it to certain electromagnetic frequencies, it began to warm up. The ice around it started melting at an accelerating rate. We calculated that if it fully activated, it could melt a significant portion of the Antarctic ice sheet within weeks, raising global sea levels by several meters. But the true shock came when they managed to penetrate the outer shell using harmonic frequencies rather than physical drilling. Inside was a vast chamber, perfectly preserved in vacuum despite being buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice. The chamber was approximately 200 meters in diameter and 50 meters high," Mendoza continued, showing images that looked like something from science fiction. The walls were covered in the same symbols found at the lunar sites, but these were active, glowing with a soft blue light. In the center was a crystalline structure, similar to what the remote viewers described in the moon's core, but smaller, maybe 10 meters tall. And it was conscious. I know how that sounds, but when you stood near it, you could feel its awareness, like being watched by something immeasurably old and intelligent. The international team had set up a temporary base around the discovery, bringing in linguists, physicists, and xenobiologists. Dr. Liu Wei, a quantum physicist from Beijing, had made the first breakthrough in understanding the structure's purpose. It was a transmitter, but not for electromagnetic signals. It was designed to send and receive consciousness itself. Thoughts, memories, entire personalities could be transmitted through quantum entanglement to similar structures anywhere in the universe. The lunar facilities, the Antarctic structure, and we believe others hidden around Earth, form a network, a consciousness-based internet that predates human civilization by millions of years. Mendoza revealed that similar structures had been detected, but not yet excavated in Siberia, the Sahara Desert, and beneath the Pacific Ocean near the Mariana Trench. They're positioned at specific points that correspond to Earth's electromagnetic field patterns, like acupuncture points on a planetary scale. When activated, they could theoretically alter the planet's entire electromagnetic signature, possibly even its gravitational relationship with other bodies in the solar system. We found evidence that they had been activated before, approximately 12,000 years ago, corresponding with the Younger Dryas period, and the sudden end of the last ice age. The most disturbing discovery came when the team attempted to interface with the crystalline structure, using quantum computers. It responded immediately, Mendoza said, his hands shaking as he recalled the event. Information flooded our systems, but not data in any format we understood. It was pure knowledge, downloading directly into the minds of anyone connected to the system. Dr. Angela Reeves, our lead programmer, experienced the full download. In less than 30 seconds, she acquired understanding of mathematical concepts that don't exist in human science, saw visions of Earth's history from perspectives we couldn't comprehend, and most remarkably, gained the ability to read and write in the symbolic language on the walls. But the download came at a cost. Reeves had suffered massive neural trauma, her brain showing activity patterns similar to someone experiencing hundreds of years of memories simultaneously. She survived, but was forever changed. In the few coherent statements she made before being relocated to a classified medical facility, she said, "They're coming back, They never really left, just withdrew to let us develop. The experiment is ending. Earth is about to be reclaimed by its original designer. Humanity was just one of many trials. And we passed. Barely. The structures are activation keys. When they all come online, Earth transforms, becomes something else, something more. The international response to the Antarctic discovery had been swift and unprecedented. Sarah had obtained documents showing that within days, a new protocol called Project Convergence was initiated, bringing together resources from every major nation. The public was told nothing, but behind the scenes, the most massive mobilization of scientific and military assets in history was underway. Dr. Harold Kim, a former member of the National Security Council, had leaked details of emergency sessions where world leaders were briefed on the implications. The consensus was that we're facing a species-level event, Kim had told Sarah. Not extinction, but transformation. The structures, when activated, will alter human consciousness on a global scale. Those who can adapt will evolve. Those who can't, we don't know. Mendoza showed Sarah video footage from the last day before the site was militarized. The crystalline structure had begun pulsing in sync with signals from the moon. And as it did, everyone in the chamber experienced shared visions. We all saw the same thing simultaneously, he explained. Earth, millions of years ago, populated by beings of incredible sophistication. They looked vaguely humanoid but taller, more graceful, with enlarged craniums and eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible spectrum. They were building these structures, placing them carefully, then leaving. But the vision showed they weren't abandoning Earth. They were planting seeds, setting up an experiment that would take millions of years to complete. Humanity is the result, and we're approaching harvest time. The Antarctic structure had revealed something else. A countdown, displayed in multiple human languages and updating in real time. It showed a date and time. September 23, 2027, 1442 UTC. When we first saw it, it showed exactly 1700 days remaining. Mendoza said, "Every structure we've detected since shows the same countdown. They're all synchronized, all preparing for the same moment." We tried to disable the Antarctic structure, to stop whatever process was beginning, but it was protected by an energy field we couldn't penetrate. Conventional weapons, electromagnetic pulses, nothing worked. It's indestructible by any means we possess. The health effects on those exposed to the structure were consistent with lunar exposure, rapid onset cancers, altered brain chemistry, and in some cases, enhancement of cognitive abilities. Mendoza himself had developed the ability to perform complex mathematical calculations instantaneously, could visualize up to 11 dimensions simultaneously, and had dreams that he insisted were memories from the beings who built the structures. They called themselves the architects, he said. They existed partially in our dimension, and partially in others. Earth was one of millions of worlds they seeded with life, each an experiment in consciousness evolution. Most fail. Earth is one of the few successes, but success meant reaching a point where the experimental species could comprehend and accept their true nature as engineered beings. Sarah asked about the purpose of it all, why an advanced civilization would conduct such experiments. Mendoza's answer was philosophical. From what I understood through the downloads, they're searching for something, a specific type of consciousness that can exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Humans who have been altered by exposure to their technology are developing this ability. We're becoming what they need us to become, though for what purpose I can't fully comprehend. It has something to do with a threat they face, something that exists beyond our universe, that requires a type of consciousness they can't achieve themselves. The governments of the world had made a decision to prepare selected populations for the revelation. Mendoza showed Sarah evidence of massive underground facilities being constructed in dozens of countries, not bunkers for survival but what they called adaptation centers. They're using technology derived from the structures to gradually expose people to the consciousness-altering frequencies. The goal is to have at least 10% of the population prepared for the transition. These will be the guides for the rest when the structures fully activate. It's not about physical survival but psychological adaptation. Those who can't accept the new reality, who can't handle the knowledge that humanity was engineered, that our entire history was orchestrated, they're the ones at risk. As their meeting concluded, Mendoza revealed one final piece of information that chilled Sarah to her core. The structures aren't just in Antarctica or the locations we've identified, they're everywhere. Microscopic versions in ancient monuments, in certain geological formations, even in our own DNA. The architects built redundancy into their system. Even if we destroyed all the major structures, the activation would still occur. It's encoded into the planet itself, into us. We're not just living on Earth. We're part of the experiment's hardware. When the activation occurs, every human being becomes a receiver, downloading millions of years of hidden history and knowledge. Most minds won't be able to process it. That's why they're building the adaptation centers, to try to save as many as possible from the psychological collapse that's coming. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 7, the final chapter, where we'll reveal what happened to the secret Mars colony that discovered the truth about humanity's ultimate purpose and the final message from the moon before the countdown ends. Commander Jessica Torres had been dead for 6 years, according to official NASA records, lost with her crew during a classified mission to test new propulsion technology beyond Earth orbit. In reality, she had been commanding humanity's first secret colony on Mars, designated Olympus Base, established in 2018 through a joint black project between the United States, Russia, and China. Sarah Mitchell sat across from Torres in a secure facility beneath Mount Weather, Virginia, where the former astronaut had been quarantined since her emergency evacuation from Mars 3 months earlier. Torres's appearance was shocking. Her eyes had taken on a golden hue. Her skin showed patches of crystalline growth similar to what had been found in the autopsies of Apollo personnel. And most disturbingly, she claimed to be in constant telepathic contact with 12 other consciousness entities, some human, others decidedly not. Mars was never about establishing a backup colony for humanity, Torres began, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. We were sent there to investigate structures detected by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2016. Structures identical to those on the moon but far older, possibly millions of years older. The public Mars missions, Perseverance, the planned SpaceX colonies, they're all diversion. The real action has been happening at Olympus Base, where 24 of us have been studying the largest cache of alien technology ever discovered. What we found there explains everything: why the moon was placed in Earth orbit, why humans were engineered, and what happens when the countdown reaches 0. Torres pulled up classified images on a secured tablet, showing vast underground halls beneath the Martian surface, perfectly preserved in the thin atmosphere. The architecture was impossible. Curves that shouldn't be able to support weight, materials that shifted between solid and translucent states, and everywhere, the same symbolic language found on the moon and in Antarctica. Mars was their first laboratory, she explained. The architects tested their consciousness evolution technology there first, billions of years ago, when Mars still had water and an atmosphere. We found evidence of at least 3 different species they created and discarded, each one failing to achieve what they needed. The structures are littered with remains, preserved perfectly, showing progressive attempts to create beings capable of multidimensional consciousness. The most significant discovery had been in what they designated the archive chamber, a vast spherical room where information was stored, not in any physical medium but in the fabric of space-time itself. When you entered the chamber, knowledge simply appeared in your mind. Torres continued. Complete histories of civilizations across the galaxy, technical specifications for technologies we couldn't dream of, and most importantly, the true purpose of the human experiment. We're not just being evolved or upgraded, we're being prepared to serve as conscious interfaces between dimensions. The architects exist primarily in higher dimensions, but need beings rooted in 3-dimensional space to interact with certain aspects of reality. Humans who successfully undergo the transformation become bridges, capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously while maintaining coherent consciousness. Torres revealed that the Mars colony had made contact with living architects, not physically but through consciousness projection facilitated by the Martian structures. They don't see time the way we do, she explained. To them, humanity's entire existence from emergence to transformation is a single moment. They've been adjusting our evolution in real time from their perspective, making changes that to us seem spread across millennia. They showed us visions of the moment of activation, September 23rd. Every human on Earth will experience simultaneous consciousness expansion. Those who have been prepared, either through direct exposure to their technology or through genetic predisposition, will ascend to multidimensional awareness. The other will experience every moment of human history simultaneously, every life, every death, every thought that has ever occurred. Without preparation, it's a form of madness from which there's no return. The Mars colony had discovered something else, something that explained the urgency of the 2027 deadline. In the deepest chamber of the Martian complex, they found a warning, a message left by the last species to fail the transformation. They were called the Venari, Torres said, showing images of tall insect-like beings with multiple arms and compound eyes. They had achieved spaceflight, had colonized multiple worlds in their system, but when their activation moment came, they weren't psychologically prepared for the truth of their artificial origin. Their civilization collapsed in 3 days. The survivors devolved, became primitive, eventually extinct. Their message was simple: prepare your species for the truth, or face the same fate. But the Mars colony had discovered something the architects hadn't intended them to find: a fragment of data from outside our universe, a warning from another group of beings who had encountered the architects before. The architects aren't benevolent or malevolent, Torres explained. They're desperate. They're fighting something, a force from outside our universe that consumes consciousness itself. They've been creating species across multiple galaxies, searching for those capable of helping them fight this threat. Humanity is one of their more successful experiments, but we're not the only one. On September 23, 2027, Earth doesn't just experience transformation, it gets recruited into a war that spans dimensions. Torres showed Sarah communication logs from Olympus Base's final days. The colonists had been experiencing accelerated transformation due to their proximity to the Martian structures. We started sharing thoughts involuntarily, she read from the logs. Individual consciousness began breaking down, replaced by something collective but not hive-minded. We remained ourselves, but also became part of something larger. Dr. Chen described it as every human becoming a neuron in a vast cosmic brain, maintaining independence while contributing to a greater consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying. We could feel the thoughts of the architects, their fear of what's coming, their hope that humanity might be the key to survival, not just for them but for all conscious life in our universe. The evacuation of Mars had been triggered by an unexpected event. The structures had suddenly activated at full power, not gradually as expected but all at once. We later learned it was in response to something detected at the edge of our solar system, Torres explained. A probe or scout from the force the architects feared. It was destroyed by automated defenses we didn't even know existed, weapons platforms hidden in the asteroid belt that have been dormant for millions of years. But its appearance means the enemy knows about Earth, knows about the experiment. The 2027 activation isn't just about human evolution anymore. It's about preparing Earth's defenses for what's coming. Torres revealed that similar colonies had been established throughout the solar system, each investigating different aspects of the architect technology. Europa held manufacturing facilities that could construct matter from pure energy. Titan contained what appeared to a shipyard with vessels designed for interdimensional travel. The asteroid Ceres was hollow, containing a massive computational matrix that might be the backup storage for every consciousness that had ever lived on Earth. We're surrounded by their technology, she said. The entire solar system is their laboratory, their fortress, their nursery for species like us. And it's all about to come online. The physical transformation Torres had undergone was accelerating. During their conversation, Sarah watched as the crystalline patches on her skin grew slightly, forming patterns that resembled circuit boards or neural networks. "It doesn't hurt," Torres assured her. "It's more like becoming more myself than I've ever been. I can perceive 12 dimensions now, can see the probability streams of future events. I know that you'll publish this information, that some will believe, most won't. But enough will prepare. I can see the moment of activation, billions of humans suddenly aware of their true nature, the panic, the wonder, the transformation. About 30% will successfully transition. The others will need help. Years of therapy to accept what they've learned. But humanity survives, changed but intact." Sarah asked, "About the final message from the moon, the one Torres had mentioned when they first made contact." Torres's expression became grave. 3 days ago, every receiver on Earth, capable of picking up lunar transmissions, received the same message simultaneously. It wasn't in code, wasn't hidden. It was broadcast openly in every human language. The message said, "Children of Earth, your childhood ends soon. You were created for a purpose greater than survival, greater than expansion. You are the antibodies against entropy itself. Your consciousness, properly evolved, can prevent the heat death of the universe, can fight forces that exist outside space-time. The choice to accept this destiny remains yours. But know that refusing means not just the end of humanity but the eventual end of all conscious life in this reality." The architects failed to achieve the necessary consciousness evolution themselves. They grew too rigid, too bound by their original dimensional constraints. You are their attempt to create something they couldn't become. Truly multidimensional beings capable of conscious action across all planes of existence. The activation is not an invasion or conquest. It is graduation. Those who pass through will become something new, something necessary. The universe itself depends on your success. Torres stood, and Sarah noticed she seemed to phase slightly, her form becoming translucent for a moment before solidifying. "I have maybe a week before the transformation completes," Torres said. "Then I'll be something else. Still Jessica Torres, but also more. Those of us who've undergone advanced transformation are being gathered at 12 sites around the world. We'll serve as guides during the activation, helping others through the transition. The government has protocols in place, but they're insufficient. No amount of preparation can fully ready someone for the moment they realize their entire species was manufactured, that free will itself might be an illusion, that we're components in a machine, so vast we can barely comprehend its edge." Before their meeting ended, "Torres, your one final revelation. The Space Force has detected them. The enemy, the architect's fear. They're still far away, perhaps 100 years from reaching Earth at their current speed, but they're coming, drawn by the activation energy that will be released in 2027. They consume consciousness, entire civilizations reduced to nothing, not death, but complete erasure from existence. The architects have fought them for billions of years across multiple universes. Earth is their latest battlefield, and humanity is their newest weapon. We didn't just go to the moon to explore. We went because we were called. Every step of our space program has been guided, pushing us toward this moment when we either evolve or perish." Sarah left the facility with her mind reeling from the revelations. Over the following weeks, she compiled everything she had learned, the testimony of astronauts, scientists, and military personnel, the evidence of structures on the Moon, Mars, and Earth, the transformation of human consciousness already underway. She knew that publishing this information would either prepare humanity for the greatest transformation in its history, or would be dismissed as the ravings of conspiracy theorists. But as she worked, she began experiencing changes herself, dreams that felt like memories from other times, other lives, mathematical concepts appearing in her mind fully formed, the ability to sense the thoughts and emotions of others at a distance. On September 1st, 2027, 3 weeks before the activation, Sarah published her complete findings simultaneously on every platform she could access. The reaction was immediate and polarizing. Governments neither confirmed nor denied the information. Scientists called for investigations. Religious leaders struggled to reconcile the revelations with their faiths. But most importantly, people began to prepare. Meditation centers opened to help individuals ready their consciousness for expansion. Support groups formed for those experiencing early transformation symptoms. Families gathered, knowing that in 3 weeks, everything would change. As Sarah uploaded the final file, she noticed something strange. The computer screen began displaying symbols she somehow understood. Though she had never seen them before, they formed a message. Thank you for your service to consciousness. Your role in preparing your species is noted and appreciated. When the moment comes, do not fear the dissolution of self. You will remain you, but also become us. Become everything. The experiment concludes, but existence continues. Enhanced, evolved, eternal. The moon hung in the night sky, appearing exactly as it had for all of human history. But now Sarah knew the truth. It was watching, waiting, counting down to the moment when its true purpose would be revealed. Inside it, vast machines prepared for activation. Throughout the solar system, ancient technologies stirred to life, and on Earth, humanity stood on the threshold of discovering that every myth about gods descending from the heavens, every story of angels and demons, every tale of creation and apocalypse, had been fragments of a single truth. We were created, we were guided, and now we were about to become something else entirely. The countdown continued. 22 days, 14 hours, 31 minutes. The greatest revelation in human history approached, not with invasion fleets or apocalyptic destruction, but with the simple truth that we had never been alone, had never been free, and had always been destined for something beyond our comprehension. Some would call it the end of the world, others would call it the beginning. But for those who knew the truth, it was simply the next phase of an experiment that began billions of years ago, when the architects first looked at a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, and decided it would be perfect for their purposes. NASA never stopped going to the moon because they lost interest or funding. They stopped because they were told to stop, told to wait, told to prepare. And now, as governments worldwide announced new lunar missions, it wasn't to explore or exploit. It was to welcome our creators home, and to receive the final instructions for humanity's transformation from a single planet species to something that could exist across dimensions, fight enemies from outside reality itself, and possibly save not just Earth, but the entire universe from forces that threatened all conscious existence. The truth was more fantastic than any conspiracy theory, more profound than any religion, more terrifying than any horror story, and more beautiful than any dream. We went to the moon and discovered we were not explorers but subjects in the greatest experiment ever conducted. And on September 23, 2027, at exactly 1442 UTC, the experiment would end, and humanity's true purpose would begin.